We begin tonight here in South Korea, where relief is setting in after a week of worry. More than 300 Korean workers detained in the U.S. state of Georgia finally returned home this afternoon. Now, to walk us through the latest developments, we're joined by Arirang's foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young, who has been following this story from the start. Welcome, Soo-young.
Hi, Yoo-jin.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, Soo-young, let's begin with the live scenes of these Korean workers returning home after a very long and dramatic week.
Sure, Jan, what a week we've had. It was such a relief when we saw the 316 Koreans stepping through the airport at Incheon International Airport, of course, and 14 nationals of Japan, Indonesia and China as well. They all touched down in South Korea at 3:23 p.m. on Friday, ending their week-long detainment under U.S. immigration authorities, who conducted a massive raid on a Hyundai-LG battery plant in Georgia. Now, after a 15-hour journey on a chartered Korean Air flight from Atlanta, we saw Koreans stepping off the plane, evidently tired, many of them on their phones, presumably with their loved ones to tell them that they'd landed safely. Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Hoon-sik was also waiting for them, welcoming them back as soon as they stepped off the plane.
We are considering options like counseling to support their mental health. There was one pregnant woman on board, and we ensured she had a first-class seat. We welcomed them all back with applause and a sense of relief.
They are now homebound, some of them with their families, who greeted them very emotionally at the airport. The 14 foreign nationals will have their accommodation and their plane tickets to their home countries arranged by the company. During bilateral negotiations between Seoul and Washington to secure their release, South Korea pressured the United States to rule out deportation or trials and enable a swift voluntary departure so that the workers can avoid tarnishing their U.S. immigration records. Out of the 317 Koreans arrested, all but one who remains in the U.S. due to family ties have now completed their voluntary departure.
Right, but we know that this is not the end of this issue because this incident actually exposed a fundamental problem with visa issuance for Korean firms in the U.S. For example, when bringing over Korean workers to build and set up factories, right?
Yes, you're exactly right, Yoo-jin. And as if to remind us of these outstanding issues, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun arrived back in Korea an hour after the workers' chartered flight. He flew over to Washington, D.C. earlier this week, not only to negotiate their release, but to also propose establishing a bilateral working group with the U.S. to work on visa tracks for professionals.
To resolve this issue fundamentally, we agreed to create a working group between the U.S. State Department and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs to establish a new visa category. This group will include talks on setting up a separate desk at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul so that people working in fields linked to Korean investment in the U.S. can obtain visas as quickly as possible.
This crisis proved how the lack of dedicated visa programs for Koreans makes it extremely difficult for firms to actually invest in the United States, as they cannot deploy workers with specialized skill sets to complete key facilities and set up operations. In fact, US President Donald Trump himself appeared to recognize this need for foreign skilled workers, especially Koreans, to enable foreign direct investment projects and ultimately strengthen American competence in high-tech areas. Trump even held up the Korean workers' chartered flight by almost 24 hours, suggesting that they stay on at the Georgia factory. Now, before leaving D.C., Minister Cho Hyun met with members of Congress who welcomed the idea of establishing a working group to prevent future incidents from recurring. And Cho explained to them that the Korean public is deeply concerned about the recent mass detention of Korean professionals who visited the United States really to faithfully carry out investment projects, and that he's been conducting consultations with the U.S. with a very heavy heart.
And with that being said, we know that South Korea's top office today underscored the need for fundamental solutions, right?
That's right, Yoo-jin. So earlier today, on Friday afternoon, National Security Advisor Wi Sung-lak told members of the press that from this incident, there is a task ahead, and that is to draw lessons and design measures to prevent recurrences from happening, really highlighting the role of the bilateral working group that Cho Hyun mentioned. He called for a phased approach to improve the current visa system and also create new visa categories. In doing so, he set out a roadmap of first clarifying guidelines guidelines on existing visa schemes to remove uncertainty for Korean firms. Second, working with the US to shorten the time taken to issue visas, for instance, as well as lowering rejection rates. In the long run, though, he said that US laws would need amending, though this might be difficult, of course, to create new visa quotas and create different types of visas for Korean professionals.
All right. Once again, we're really glad to see the safe return of Korean nationals, and we're really glad that you're here today. Thank you, Soo-young.
What a relief, and thank you for having me on, Yoo-jin.
Thank you.